lead to Southwest being interested in acquiring another airline, and that's where JetBlue comes in. Stifel out today upgrading JetBlue, moving it up to a buy rating. The analyst basically says, look, love buying JetBlue, makes sense on a number of levels. Southwest needs fleet diversification. Remember the JetBlue flight, or the JetBlue fleet, I should say. These are Airbus airplanes. Don't forget, JetBlue reports earnings before the bell tomorrow. Guys, it'll be interesting to see whether or not there's a question or two for the CEO about this. Shares moving up 3.5% today. We should point out, guys, there's nobody else that we've talked with who has said, yeah, we think that Southwest is in the market to buy JetBlue. But it's an interesting theory that's out there bouncing around.
It's a theory that Stifel did float here today. Who knows? Maybe further airline consolidation. Phil, thank you for that. Well, Facebook stock is getting a boost today after CEO Mark Zuckerberg appeared on NBC in an exclusive interview with Lester Holt, defending Facebook's political ad policy, which has faced criticism recently for allowing campaign ads that contain falsehoods.
I get that a lot of people are angry at us. Part of growing up for me has just been realizing that it is more important to be understood than it is to be liked. And I believe it very strongly. And I do think that people can make up their own minds about me or the work that we're doing, but this is who I am.
Very interesting comments there, Mike. I don't know that it says much exactly about the company and the direction, but we know Facebook has been in the headlines an awful lot for a lot of different reasons. Over the last month, those shares have been essentially flat.
Yeah, the market has not necessarily kind of wiggled with every turn in this story in terms of whether, in fact, they're going to take political ads and all the rest of it. It seems like the business changes hardly at all, even as all the headlines move. The issue is, though, Facebook, I believe, is genuine when management says, we'd love to be regulated. Just tell us how. Give us the rule book in terms of how we're supposed to handle privacy and ads and everything. And if that day's coming closer, Facebook is probably well positioned for it.
Let's talk energy. The sector is leading the market today. Dom Chu has a look at some of the biggest movers for us. Hi, Dom.
All right, so Wilfred, for good reason, because despite the fact that oil prices are lower on the day, you've got some of the biggest oil services companies up massively. In fact, Halliburton shares one of the best performers in the S&P 500 today after a mixed earnings report. Earnings matched estimates. Sales came shy of some of those estimates as well, but it was the path forward, the company outlining some of its plans to contain costs going forward that had sent Halliburton shares up 6% on the day. That's leading all the oil field services companies higher on the day as well, as you can see there, despite the fact that oil prices are lower. But we also want to put some context around some of these big gains that we're seeing in these energy-related stocks today. If you take a look at a 5-year chart of what the Spider Energy ETF has done, you can see there it's lost about a third of its value. Even worse for some of the oil field services names. So yes, big pop today, Wilfred Courtney, but at the same time, the downtrend over the medium to longer term is very still solidly in place, guys. Back over to you.
Dom, thanks very much. We've got just under 5 minutes left to trade. 4.5 minutes left. We're up 0.7% on the S&P 500. Pretty much near session highs, in fact. Now, news just breaking on our air a few minutes ago from our David Faber. SoftBank will take control of WeWork via an injection of significant new capital. That's according to sources. The deal could be announced as soon as tomorrow. David's working on that story. We'll have more in just a few minutes. A roller coaster ride for that company of late. The implied valuation, David told us, was 7 to 8 billion for the company. A long way, of course, from some of the recent mooted valuations. Now, Wells Fargo stock trading higher today as new CEO Charles Scharf officially took over. The company has been without a permanent replacement since March 28th of this year when Tim Sloan stepped down. Scharf was most recently the CEO of BNY Mellon, and before that was the chief executive of Visa. He'll be the fourth person to run Wells Fargo since the fake account scandal broke in 2016. Mike, the stock jumped sharply the day it was announced. It then came down as yields slipped and has had a nice rally with all the bank stocks over the course of the last week following earnings. It's actually up a net 2% since the day it was announced he was taking over. He's got one immediate challenge, which is to get the Fed asset cap lifted. And moving forward, just whether he can reinvigorate the bank and get investors to think it warrants the old multiple it used to have.
Exactly right. I mean, it had this huge premium to the other very large banks for many years. That's been mostly bled away. At this point, really used to trade on, by the way, the same types of salesmanship that eventually, were shown to be excesses. So, but I do think that, the runway is pretty clear, right? So you get the asset cap potentially loosened or lifted. And then, the company reported earnings. They were fine, but not particularly stellar. It seems like there's probably more room operationally to perform better. And then the backdrop is looking better in general for the banks, right? The yield curve looking okay, and the mortgage market's very strong. Wells Fargo should be well positioned for that.
Barb, what do you think when you're looking at the banks after we've heard from many of them, more upbeat than perhaps we would have thought, especially in the consumer units of many of these banks? An interesting place for you?
I tend to be in the MasterCards and Visas of the world because I'd rather play that, because the banks really are tied so much to interest rates. And after the models changed in the last 10 years, it's not really my cup of tea. However, you've got JP Morgan making new highs. A lot of these have done very well with their loan growths, consumer loans, this sort of thing. So
fair enough. All right, Mike, we've got just about 2 minutes left. Tell us a little bit about these market internals. What are you seeing here?
Did want to see a quick look at the Treasury yield curve from 2 to 10. If you look at a 3-month chart of this, you're back up toward the late summer highs. That's been a real positive backdrop. Yields going up, the curve in the longer end is stretching out, and you see it back to basically August levels. That was a big worry point of the markets back in August. That has loosened up. And just in general, underlying breadth of the stock market today also quite strong, and new highs well outpacing new lows.
We've got 1.5 minutes left. Let's get to Bertha Coombs of the NASDAQ for a breakdown of the movers there. Bertha.
Hey, well, Apple today is definitely the strength we're seeing here in the NASDAQ for the third straight day, setting a new all-time record high. In fact, Apple so far this month, the move that it has seen up has provided a greater point impact to the NASDAQ 100 than the 4 FANG stocks combined, even when you trade out NVIDIA, which is up about 12% so far this month. Meantime, Vertex Pharmaceuticals, we're watching that one. The company's latest cystic fibrosis drug was approved by the FDA. It is halted at the moment for news. Will likely open after the close. Had already risen about 4% into that. Finally, Peloton today losing ground after gaining 4%, with a lot of analysts saying great things about the stock. But Seema, investors just aren't buying it.
Yeah, certainly one of the underperformers. Thank you, Bertha. With today's gains, the S&P 500 is poised to close higher and break above 3,000, close above 3,000 for the first time in 1 month. The market responding nicely to those comments made by Chinese Vice Premier earlier today, plus continued strength in financials. JP Morgan at a 52-week high and now up over 5% in the past 1 week, responding well again to better than expected earnings. Lennar also at a 52-week high. That's more or less a yield play for the markets. And there's the closing bell. The S&P 500 closing above 3,000 for the first time in 1 month at 3,006. The Dow Jones Industrial below 27,000 at 26,826.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Closing Bell. I'm Wilfred Frost.
And I'm Courtney Reagan in for Sarah Eisen, along with Mike Santoli, CNBC Senior Markets Commentator. We're in the market zone, so you can see the day's market action on the right side of your screen, with the story still coming up on the tabs on the bottom of your screen.
Let's check in how we finished here on Wall Street. The Dow higher by only 0.2%, largely, of course, because of Boeing, which dragged its performance. But the S&P 500 tells the truer picture of sentiment today, up 0.7%, ending right at the session highs. NASDAQ and Russell higher still, just shy of 1% of gains.
Joining us to talk about the market today, we have Barbara Duran. She's Senior Portfolio Manager at BD8 Capital Partners. She's still with us. And Michael Yoshikami, Destination Wealth Management Founder and CEO, joins us. We're going to give you the first comment today. Mike Santoli, as we often do, ended up kind of nicely there for the S&P 500 at the highs at 3,006.
Yes, I would say a pretty sturdy performance. A lot of the trends that you've seen in the last few weeks with cyclical groups getting traction, bond yields going up, just a general gradual progression of risk appetites rising. That was in place today. I don't think you really took at any particularly key levels, but the advanced decline line, if you look at the long-term chart of market breadth, it did hit a new high today. So things are lining up in favor of the bullish case. Now, again, we've been stuck under the highs for a while right now, so it still has to be proven, but it seems like you have JP Morgan, Apple hitting new all-time highs. It's a net positive when you see those things.
Michael Yoshikami, what's your take as to whether we need a big fresh catalyst to go to all-time highs, or we can just slowly grind our way higher to it?
Well, I think there could potentially be a slow grind, but I think the catalyst that we're looking for is really what's happening with earnings. So the China overhang seems to be dissipating at this point. I think the Fed is likely to cut rates 0.25% here coming in the next couple of weeks. But we need to see earnings come in solid as they have so far, and more particularly hopefully you'll start to see CFOs and CEOs on earnings calls actually talk with some more a sense of optimism, given perhaps some of the overhang from the China trade talks going away at this point.
I was just going to say, it's been an hour, and we haven't really talked so much about China yet, Barb. What do you think? Are we sort of past the worst of it?
I think investors right now are hopeful we're past the worst of it. However, that would be foolish to think so, because we've done this play so many times this year, but I think it's definitely somewhat discounted the market. So, hopefully if we don't get some shock, the market does have, I think, limited downside here, and potentially if we get some good China trade news, and certainly there's been lots of positive noises this week, we could get to that new high sooner rather than later.
Major news on WeWork breaking just moments ago on the show. David Faber broke that news. He joins us again with some of the latest. David, what can you tell us?
Yeah, some updates here, of course. Again, to reiterate what we first brought you, 10, 15 minutes or so ago, Wilfred. SoftBank and WeWork are in talks that are very advanced, designed to reach a deal as soon as later today or early tomorrow, in which SoftBank will take control of the company, of the space sharing company. WeWork, of course, the embattled co-working company that they've already invested some $10.5 billion at SoftBank through their Vision Fund. It would be new funding. Earlier I described it as equity. There is a debt component here that would also have the effect of accelerating warrants that SoftBank received, the Vision Fund received as well, from its last round of funding. Remember, the one that valued the company as high as $47 billion, though they did not invest that large an amount at that point. But as we've said, they've invested in various ways along the valuation scale, as much as $10.5 billion. This will be an additional $4 to $5 billion. Here's what we also can tell you at this point. Sources close to the talks tell me that SoftBank would then have control of WeWork, perhaps as much as 70 to 80% control. Earlier I'd said 60 to 70%, more reporting, as high perhaps as 70 to above, perhaps as close as 80%. Adam Neumann, of course, the company's founder, longtime CEO, who stepped down from that role a few weeks ago, would maintain or have a small double-digit stake in the company. But perhaps importantly for him, he would live to see another day. And perhaps hope, of course, that his equity is going to be worth more. Marcelo Claure, somebody I know fairly well, of course, man who ran Sprint, very senior official at SoftBank, would take control of the management of the company. Unclear if that would be a long period of time, but in the near term, at least, he would take control of WeWork. He, of course, is a guy who can work his way out of tough situations, Sprint being certainly one example of that. And all of this being done, of course, by SoftBank to give the company new money and to give it the time that it feels it needs to, essentially put it on the right track and get it back to growth and potentially that place that had been, not something they've been able to get to, namely profitability. And so that is the plan as it currently stands. Of course, there had been some talks that WeWork was having with its longtime financial supporter as well, J.P. Morgan, but they have gone, I'm told, the SoftBank route at this point. This seems to be a very highly likely outcome. Would value WeWork at about $7.5 to $8 billion. Again, to put that in perspective, as we said, SoftBank itself has already invested $10.5 billion. The new funding will bring that up to perhaps as much as $14 to $15 billion at this point. So that's what we can tell you. We know. We'll wait, of course, to see if and when they get to an announcement how they describe the new funding exactly, but did want to get back and sort of clarify a few things there and share what we know. Back to you.
I mean, David, fascinating that as you said it there at the end, SoftBank themselves having injected a total of 14 to 15 billion to this company that's now valued at half of that level. It just shows the fall from grace and how many people, despite this saving package, which, as you said, gives the company and those involved another day, another year, perhaps, of breathing space, just shows the extraordinary fall from grace that we've seen.
Without a doubt, listen, it wasn't that long ago, Wilf, as you well know, the market was expecting an IPO that could come at, at one point we thought $25, $30 billion, perhaps even above that. Few expected it would come at a level at which SoftBank invested earlier this year, that $47 billion number that gets bandied about. Now, remember, there were a lot of things that came along with that deal. It wasn't that large a slug of money. And one of the things that did come along at that time, at that incredibly high value, was these warrants, which are going to be repriced down, which are going to give SoftBank that additional ability to own even more shares, along with, of course, the new funding that they're putting in as well. But yeah, it has been a tough road to say the least. It has not reflected well at this point, certainly on SoftBank. Masa, of course, who runs the company, is somebody who loves founders. He loves their energy and their vision, and you can certainly say that there was no lack of that from Mr. Newman through these years, as he did successfully build this company, even though, of course, there were many questions as to whether it would ever be built into a profitable enterprise. Their contention at SoftBank is, and Masa's, of course, is, I remember when he explained it to me during an interview we did last March, is that it can be, and perhaps will be, and now it will be up to them to bring it to that level that they believe it can actually get to in terms of both profitability and growth.
David, thanks so much for that. Mike, your initial take, I mean, an equity deal is one factor of this, and the valuation at $7 to $8 billion, the other significant factor.
I mean, it's a massive retrenchment. If you talk about an already public company that has a tremendous haircut in their valuation, then they get an equity infusion, recapitalization. I mean, oftentimes those are the times when you're about to turn for the better. I think the question is this just going to be the capital that allows the company to remain in its current scope, current expansion plans? Or are they going to have to really shrink and get out of long-term lease obligations? It's unclear on an operating basis what the plan would be from here. Keep in mind, when they were going to do an IPO, let's say of $3 billion, they were going to get $4 billion in new loans along with that. That would have been the $7 billion, probably would have kept them going for a while. And it just shows you that the overall market valuation is largely an abstraction, because they would have had the same amount of capital and we would have said it was a $30 billion company because you were willing to put a multiple on an unprofitable business. There's a universe in which the market would have swallowed that. We don't live in that universe.
It's amazing how close they got to an IPO and everything that's happened.
Close, potentially. They're close in terms of the stages. Okay. It's unclear how close they were in terms of investors genuinely writing checks. We don't know.
Yeah, I'd also point out that the originally floated $47 billion was never really that realistic. As David just pointed out, only a small amount of SoftBank's round warrants were valued at that. It was almost a bit of a trick, which again raises all of these conflict of interest questions, a trick so that they could leak to the public market that that's a hard value for this company. But nonetheless, 20 to 30 was definitely the range when people seriously talked about the IPO, and we've got a massive haircut from there.
Yeah, now if David says $7.5 to $8 billion, unbelievable. Well, TD Ameritrade earnings are out. We want to make sure to get over to Contessa Brewer. She has the numbers for us. Hi, Contessa.
Hi there, Courtney. We have a revenue beat here coming in at $1.56 billion versus the estimate of $1.47 billion. Earnings coming in at $1.05 adjusted versus the 98 cents that was estimated. I really want to talk about these $0 commissions that went into effect October 3rd. We know that the street is expecting earnings to decline because of that, some 36% in the first fiscal quarter of 2020, and the company's CEO Tim Hockey says that they are planning for that both in terms of revenue and expenses. But listen to this, quote, 2 weeks post announcement, we've seen a 49% increase in our new accounts open compared to what we were averaging in the September quarter. And they say these are clients of all sizes, smaller accounts to multi-million-dollar portfolios. They think that that's going to make a big difference. And for the full year, they're already reporting record new net client assets of $93 billion. That's up 7% year over year, and record average client trades for the year up 6% as well. Guys, you can see the stock now after hours up 1.1%. Wilf?
Contessa, thank you very much for that. Up higher, as Contessa says, following an EPS beat. And tomorrow, don't miss our first on CNBC interview with the TD Ameritrade CEO, Tim Hockey. Let's get back to Meg Terrell for the latest on today's opioid settlements. Hey, Meg.
Hey, Wilf, it's been a whirlwind. We're here in Cleveland, where the first landmark trial over the opioid crisis was supposed to kick off this morning. Within minutes, that hadn't happened because a settlement was reached. Now the story has shifted to a potential broader settlement with at least 5 companies. 4 state attorneys general who are leading the negotiations on behalf of states just held a conference call and outlined a framework. The bullet points of which we really reported last week, and they don't seem to have changed much. They include $18 billion in cash paid over 18 years by the three major drug distributors, McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, and Cardinal Health, $4 billion in cash paid over 2 to 3 years by Johnson & Johnson, and $23 billion worth of addiction treatment medicines by Teva, and a couple other points that would be added to this. Now, municipalities, the cities and counties, are not on board with this settlement proposal. So it's really turned into a states versus cities and counties story here, where the states want to accept this and move forward. The cities and counties say they need more. So we're going to be looking for more on this, but this is moving stocks quite a bit as investors hope that this could be putting this behind them for some of these companies. That doesn't seem to be the story just yet, guys. Back over to you.
Thank you very much, Meg. Michael, I was going to ask you how you feel about some of these healthcare names. Of course, they're down today, but some of these settlements at least take away at least a bit of uncertainty with what some of these lawsuits could have ended up otherwise.
Yeah, that's really what this is all about. His question is, are these stocks being priced at absolutely Armageddon scenarios? And is it really an overstatement? The fact that stocks perhaps are starting to rally a bit on these settlements is really, I think, indicative of just the absolute negative fear that people have about these are going to be some catastrophic amounts that they're going to have to pay. And I think they're not going to be. I think in the end, they're going to be some reasonable sort of settlement that's going to occur. And I think that's going to reduce an overhang on some of these healthcare stocks as these settlements are announced.
Dividends also remain high in a number of these names. Barb, what do you think about some of these healthcare names? Interested in any of them at this point?
In terms of the opioid,
yes,
there's a name I've been watching in particular is Johnson & Johnson, which that's not the opioid, but that's, the same in terms of the asbestos.
Right.
Because in general, these type of names, they get discounted quickly. There's lots of headline noise, but you will have opportunities in here. So there's not a particular one I'm looking at because I own names like Merck that's not particularly exposed there, but there's definitely opportunities opening up.
And a lot of movers as the story continues to unfold. We want to thank you, Barbara Duran, for being with us here today, as well as Michael Yoshikami. Well, coming up next, the Boeing blame game. We're going to talk to a pilot turned journalist about who's at fault for the problems with the 737 MAX jets. Stick with Closing Bell. We're back in 90 seconds.
Sean, tell us about your upcoming Shaun the Sheep movie. Oh yeah, that was a good bit. Really? I never looked at it that way. Wow, you do your own stunts. Wait, that's my line. See Farmageddon, a Shaun the Sheep movie, as part of your year of endless adventures with Meerkat Movies. Oh, spoiler alert. You just gave away the ending. Qualifying purchase required. Tuesdays or Wednesday. Participating cinemas. Standard ticket only. Cheapest ticket free. One membership for 12 months. Conditions apply.
And to say happy birthday, we're giving you a pair of award-winning Silver Galaxy Buds.
But it's not my birthday till June.
No, but it's ours. 10 years ago, we launched our first Galaxy smartphone. And to celebrate, we're giving customers who purchase any Galaxy S10, Note 10 or A90 5G the chance to claim a pair of amazing wireless Galaxy Buds.
Wow, and I didn't get you anything.
Get the latest Samsung Galaxy smartphone now at your local Carphone Warehouse shop or carphonewarehouse.com. Offer available on purchases made by the 23rd of October 2019 and claimed online within 30 days. T&Cs apply.
Hey, you. We didn't make Nature Valley Crunchy bars so you could just sit and scoff them in front of the TV. Not when you could be enjoying them outdoors. Up here! Race it to the top! With 100% whole grain oats and delicious honey. Nature Valley Crunchy. Get out more.
Well, shares of Boeing closing down nearly 4% as the company's 737 MAX troubles deepen. Phil LeBeau has more on that for us. Hi, Phil.
Courtney, the stock was under pressure all day, in part because of 3 downgrades and a slew of notes from analysts, all basically commenting on the reports that came out on Friday regarding these documents that were leaked from 2016 of a technical pilot. And those documents suggest that perhaps he may have been trying to mislead regulators. By the way, his attorney says that's not the case. All of this raises the question, when will the 737 MAX return to service? Will it happen in the fourth quarter? The head of EASA, which is the European European version of the FAA? Well, he was out with an interview today saying, look, it's going to be January at the earliest. Meanwhile, Dennis Muhlenberg, the CEO of Boeing, sent an employee email today saying that the company is making steady progress on the return of the 737 MAX. Dennis Muhlenberg and the other directors of Boeing did meet today, day 2 of a regularly scheduled board of directors meeting that happened down in San Antonio, Texas. On Wednesday, analysts will hear from Dennis Muhlenberg. That's when the company reports its Q3 earnings. And guys, you can bet that's going to be one of the more heavily listened to analyst calls in a long time when it comes to earnings season.
It certainly will, Phil. Thank you very much. Boeing slipping 4% today following a 7% slide on Friday. For more, let's bring in Jim Corridor, Senior Equity Analyst at CFRA Research, and William Longoviscia, Writer at Large for the New York Times Magazine. A very good afternoon to you both. Thanks for joining us. William, I'll start with you. You think that these latest revelations from Friday mean nothing more incrementally and still put a large amount of the blame, in your eyes, at the feet of the pilots of these planes?
Well, from what I can tell, and of course I haven't read these in entirety, which you'd have to do to understand what they are, these notes or text messages are inconsequential. It seems that they're being taken out of context. It seems like quite a bit of hyperventilation going on. We really learned nothing from them that has not been known for about a year. We know that Boeing made mistakes in the design of the MCAS system. We know that those mistakes are repairable. We also know that Boeing made a mistake in not disseminating knowledge of that system to the pilots. We also know, however, that the reason they did not do that was not a pursuit of profit or something like that. It was simply that it was inconceivable to them that pilots faced with the potential failures of the MCAS system would not have an immediate, instinctive and traditional solution of turning off the trim. They found 2 crews, much to everyone's regret, who did not have the skill or wherewithal or airmanship to turn off the trim. As far as these texts go, which again we have really only partial knowledge, we don't know the context. We do know that he was referring to a simulator in development, not a mature simulator. We call it an experimental simulator for the 737 MAX. And the conversation was about the simulator, not the airplane. And that simulator was a simulator in development.
I presume you've seen the response to your recent article by Captain Sullenberger, where he says, quote, it is wrong to blame the pilots who lost their lives in these disasters when the aircraft design and certification was so fatally flawed. What's your response to that? And what's your response to the fact that there were 2 crashes and still the plane was not grounded in between?
Well, Captain Sullenberger is a friend of mine, and I have great respect for him. I actually was not aware that he had commented on this at all. I don't really follow commentary. I just go on with my day job. So I have no response to that. We do know that it would have been very easy to solve this problem in the air. We do know that when the dives are characterized as non-recoverable or unrecoverable dives, that's entirely wrong. These dives actually should never have turned into dives. And they were totally recoverable. And they resulted really not from the MCAS failure, though that played a role, but ultimately from overspeed conditions. That is, the pilots in both cases did not throttle back. And why they did not throttle back, why they did not turn off the electric trim, it's anyone's guess.
Jim, we're going to turn to you for some of the reaction from the market here. Obviously, shares of Boeing dragged down the Dow today. You still have a buy, though. You also don't believe that these text messages that have been reported really change the story fundamentally for Boeing here. Why not?
Yeah, I think that the stock's reaction today is simply the reaction of 3 analyst downgrades and investor fear. I think that if there was something to this story, it would be more than just a couple of text messages between pilots, even if one of them was involved in testing this simulator. I think that there would be a paper trail that leads directly to management. In the absence of that, I have to believe that there is no real fear that was being founded by this pilot. Otherwise, he would have brought it to the attention of management, and there would be more to it. The FAA has reviewed documents. Boeing has turned over everything they have at this point. As far as I know, of course, there could be more revelations coming. But as we speak right now, there's nothing to indicate that Boeing knew that there was any reason to be afraid of the MCAS system that was being fixed. And so there's no evidence to say that Boeing is covering anything up. So I think that the reaction today is an overreaction. My thesis stands that the plane's going to come back into service next year. Boeing will begin to normalize operations, resume deliveries, and at some point during 2020, things will start to normalize.
And Jim, is that the key thing for the stock price when this plane comes back?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look back and blame, there's going to be plenty of blame to go around. Certainly, Dennis Muhlenberg's reaction to this whole fiasco hasn't been up to par, and he may see more reaction because of that. But we're looking forward. We're looking at an industry that is a complete duopoly, where there's strong commercial aerospace demand, a very strong backlog of orders that's going to be fulfilled as long as this plane comes back into service. It's going to be the most scrutinized plane in history once it comes back in. There will be a case to made that it's the safest plane to ever fly because it's going to be so scrutinized by the FAA and global regulators. So the passengers who fly it will eventually be reassured that it's safe, and it will go on to many, many years of profitability for Boeing.
Jim, I think the duopoly is an important point. William, just very quickly before we let you go, it seems like Jim does believe that 737 MAX should fly again and will soon. What do you think?
I agree completely with everything he just said. This is right across the board. I agree with it.
Well, thank you both for joining us, Jim Corridor and William Longoviscia. Still ahead here on the closing bell. Beyond Meat shares are still up more than 300% since its IPO. They have, though, fallen sharply recently. Up next, we'll break down the charts to see whether investors should be concerned about this cult stock.
And tomorrow will be a huge day for earnings. Find out what to expect from some of the biggest names on the earnings calendar later here on Closing Bell.
London, switch to Vodafone, the UK's best mobile network, and be unlimited, because the best phones deserve the best network and our new unlimited data plans. The future is exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
Max download speeds apply to unlimited data. Best network as voted by readers of trusted reviews. Terms at vodafone.co.uk/unlimited.
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. This means that travelling to the EU will change. You'll need to check online if your passport is valid for travel to Europe. If you're planning on driving, you'll need to check if you have the right documents to drive, and make sure your travel insurance covers all your healthcare needs. To keep your trip on track, check what you need to do at gov.uk/Brexit. Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October.
Hearing is an underrated miracle. Intimate whispers, the lushness of symphonies, the soothing patter of rain on leaves. If you had that taken away from you, it would be a massive loss for most of us. Almost all